to give you a short overview over the question whether or how COVID-19 impacted the Russian economy, whether there are regional or significant regional differences, and the more maybe question for the mid and long term is whether Russia will be able to catch up with Western economies and will maybe even follow the growth path of China. These are our questions today. In the beginning, we would like to show you shortly our agenda. So we will look at COVID-19 incidents in Russia, and then especially we will look at the macroeconomic development since the beginning of the transition, and look what kind of options and scenarios are there for the mid and long-term development of Russia. To give you a short idea about the Russian economy at this time or at these days, you may know Russia is a huge country. It has a population of more than 140 million inhabitants. It's a bit like Japan, but you know Japan is a bit smaller than Russia, so you can imagine that this is a specific country. Also, there are a lot of other, I would say, peculiarities, especially that Russia has had for a long time a really low unemployment rate. It has a very well-functioning labor market. And we will see later that the inflation has also been curbed in the last years quite effectively. Life expectancy is also a problem of Russia coming from the past, but there's also there are also clear signs of a better development in the last years because of better living conditions. But all in all, one has to say that Russia is still a middle-income country, and it suffers the problem of the so-called Dutch disease. Our economies, namely, it's resource-based, and also to manage this, it decided to create a so-called resource fund, a sovereign wealth fund, and the cross reserves have always been in the last years around 30% of GDP. So Russia, you can say, is always able to pay its bills. Also, the overall economic development has been quite slow, we would say, because when you look at the average growth rate of the last 10 years, it's only 1.5%. So it's really a slow growth economically. And we will later say that this is not enough to keep up with other emerging economies. But now we would like to look at Corona and especially how Russia was affected here as a country as a whole, and also by looking at the regional aspects. At first, one could say Russia was affected as many other countries in Europe with two waves. The first wave in the spring, and then we had the summer low with some kind of relief, and then it went up again, like in Western Germany or in Western Europe, and the figures are currently also increasing, but there are significant differences between especially the center of Russia, Moscow region, which is, one can say, like a country itself. It's a region of more than 10 million inhabitants. So it's like a country comparable to Hungary, maybe from the whole amount of citizens. And what was really interesting to see is that especially Moscow and the Moscow mayor, Mr. Sobyanin, took a very strict policy against COVID with really strict measures, and he was able to really slow the effect of spreading the pandemic, and he was much more successful than his regional counterparts. Also, they may have not been so interested in curbing or in tackling the crisis. And it's obvious that especially Moscow was, of course, the beginning of the disease. It's a central city of the country with a very important airport, and also via Moscow, of course. Then COVID was transported via regional airport networks. You may know every Russian region nearly has its own airport, and brought the virus to the regions. But from the point of view of policy, Moscow was much more successful in tackling the crisis. So now the problem is especially problematic or huge in the regions, but Moscow itself has remained quite stable on this. And even the Moscow mayor was highly recognized for his tough stance, even in comparison to Vladimir Putin as a president. So this was a very interesting development, and you can see here in the figures that Moscow region was taking another path than the regions overall in the country. So this is an important difference. But all in all, I will go back a bit here to this slide, is that, let's say, in Russia, there is a corona pandemic, but it's not so dynamic like in other countries, like in Italy, for instance, or even now in Germany, Western Europe. So it took its own path, you can say. What is good for Russia is that due to a very tough fiscal policy in the last 20 years, they are able to tackle the macroeconomic problems. At first, the impact economically was not so severe, but on the other side, anyway, they have a lot of reserves and a lot of, let's say, firepower to tackle the crisis. And especially, or even the IMF, with its latest mission statement from 24th of November, which has been quite recently, said that Russia is very strong or very well prepared to its strong fiscal and monetary and macroprudential response to the crisis, and especially also due to the measures that were taken in advance. Because when we look at Russia as a whole, over the last 20 years, financially it was a relatively stable country. And also the inflation, which is one aspect of this, had been attacked in the last years quite successfully, with a peak in the year of 2015, which had something to do with the Ukrainian Crimea crisis. The inflation is now under control, and Russia is also now running the so-called inflation target regime, which means that the central bank is recognized as a relevant and reputational actor in the industry of the financial services, and that what the central bank says will be conducted and will be executed. So they have a strong macroeconomic regime fiscally. Also, and this is the next point we will speak about, the structural change of the economy has been deterred because of this dependence on resources, which had over the first, let's say, 15 years after the year 2000 been the main source of income. After the very, let's say, slow growing 90s with a very low oil price, and also some kind underdeveloped, let's say, system of market institutions in Russia. It was a very, or it was known, what was named the decade of freedom, but it was also a very poor decade. And it came after the Soviet time, and the planning economy collapsed and was not able to offer the people in the country the consumption they wanted to have. And it was not before 2000, and especially, or incidentally, the takeover of Mr. Putin as a president, that oil price went up. Of course, it was not his way or his work, but he took the chance and was able to reform the country. So first market institutions were introduced, but resource dependency remained, and especially over the first 15 years of his presidency, the top-down governance was increased. There's a special word in Russia for this top-down governance. It's called power vertical. In German, we call it Machtvertikale. It's a specific word for the Russian way of governance or type of governance. That means that they try to really control each part of the country, as small as it is, from Moscow, and have a strong, let's say, government also being able to attack problems really far away from Moscow. Also, and we will see it now, that in the course of the last 5 years, a lot of things have changed, especially what regards the economic circumstances. But before, you see here the chart for the time of 1990 roughly till 2011, and what we can see here is that Russia, as other East European countries, it's the country group of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, had a deeper recession after 1990, And of course, there was an upswing, but the upswing you can see here was always associated with lower growth rates than the counterparts that were also formerly socially economies or socialist economies or centrally planned economies. So Russian economy took the same path, but it was always then somehow slower or more severe. And especially after the time of 2011, things changed. While in 2011 and 12 and even 13, there was still a positive growth rate. It soon ended in 2014, especially in 2015, with two factors being important, namely the Ukraine or Crimea crisis, and this is something that is not specific for Russia, but it was affected a really tremendous change in the trend of the oil price after 2014. So you can see here there was a sharp decline, and the oil price never came back to the level of 2014. And especially now in this year, due to Corona and the low demand for oil, Russia was in this regard heavily affected. Also, they can use the reserves they have and could get along with this problem. But you can see here that this dependency on the oil price is the main and the long-term, or let's say the real structural problem of the Russian economy. So, and while before 2014 growth was really quite positive, it soon changed, especially also because of the oil price, but also because of the sanctions. Russia suffered after the invasion in parts of Ukraine, not officially, but unofficially, and especially the annexation of Crimea, which has made Russia really become, let's say, strange partner in the eyes of political actors in Western Europe. And even here in Germany, when we were thinking that we don't need so much defense policy and defense expenses, after 2014, the saying became that the end of the peace dividend now means that we really have to come back to investments in military infrastructure, and technology. So there has been a really historical change due to this Ukraine or Crimea, let's say, problems Russia created, and it created it by itself. So nobody asked Russia for doing this. It was a really sovereign decision of the Russian government to create its own specific problem for the country. Also, how to say, ironically, somehow these sanctions Russia suffered also in some sense helped the Russian economy for the first time to try to create more, let's say, light production, more production in the agricultural area. So they were somehow forced to produce something what they never had to do before, because if you have oil to export, you have enough revenue, you can pay for the imports, you don't have to develop your own industry. This is ironically a positive effect for the Russian economy, which can be taken as maybe a positive aspect, but a really specific positive aspect. But soon after, and this is again the picture here for the time after 2014, as I told you, growth rate has never really recovered. Only in 2018 it was rather positive, but for a country like Russia, who needs to develop quickly to keep up with other emerging economies, the growth we saw here in the last 5 years has been much too low. On the other side, you can always see here roughly 30% of gross reserves to GDP. So the government has money, they have room for maneuver, and they are also investing heavily in infrastructure, but it's always done in a top-down model somehow. It's always decided in Moscow, and the regions have to execute the policy. So this is the main, I would say, structural problem about we have to talk, and due to these low growth rates, Russia has never been able in the last years to keep up with the other counterparts of the BRICS group. Also, when you look here at this graph, that Russia has been more open than like even China, Brazil, or India, a bit less than South Africa, much less than Ireland. It was not able to, in the same way like China, size this opportunity. China was growing the last 20 years dramatically and used this entry to the world market, especially when it became WTO member in 2001, to develop its economy and to raise its exports and to gain from this globalization and integration with international markets. So Russia is quite well internationally integrated. China is especially lower here because the financial market of China is not so integrated as it should be. It's going into this index, but Russia was not able to make use of this situation somehow. So you can say Russia is relatively falling behind other emerging economies and is somehow stagnating. So our idea or our question was, what is the perspective for Russia, maybe in the next mid or long-term perspective, to create some three scenarios: a pessimistic one, a status quo one, and an optimistic one. And we associate at least the chance to come back to the status quo with only a growth rate of 2%, because even the central bank says that the normal average Russian growth rate is curtailed by 2%. So this is the maximum growth they have, can reach under the current economic structure. So this is a status quo situation. For an emerging economy, it should be much higher. Yeah, but the status quo is this, and even here, this would mean rather to move sidewards and to more or less freeze the actual or current economic system they have. The pessimistic one is even more having a growth rate around 0%, especially when Russia is not able to improve its business climate. Business climate has been coined the main problem in the last years, especially to invite investors from outside, but also to incentivize domestic investors to invest or to put money into really productive assets and create jobs and economic opportunities. And we also think that the problem of Russia not being able to be dynamic is that it's not enough open regarding, I would say, economic actors. There's also a problem of open society, so that even especially the young population is rather leaving the country than being motivated to stay in the country and develop their own professional life there, and maybe they create their own company and contribute to the economic development. So from this point of view, we think that to come into an optimistic, let's say, line of development in the next years, there had to be really a significant change in the economic regime, what Russia is pursuing. And we think this needs to be especially associated with a bottom-up model of governance, and instead of this top-down model of governance, which we call the power vertical as it is now. Yeah? And we think that for this, there needs to be another incentive structure, especially for the regions. At the moment, it's that way that if the regions, or when the regions collect taxes, they have to send them to Moscow, and then Moscow redistributes the taxes back to the regions, so that even a mayor or a governor of the region has not a direct interest, maybe in attracting investors, new companies to be taxpayers in the region, because he cannot directly get the money from this investments, from this new company. So there's a lack of incentive for structural development in the regions. And so we think that to change this, we need to have another form of governance, especially more responsibility in the regions. And so we would have incentives there to change the economic structure and to be more flexible on this. Yeah. On the short term, of course, what Russia can do is at the moment to try to somehow get rid of these political problems with Western Europe. Yeah. I think the chance is there to do something in this direction. In the midterm, we think that even if Mr. Putin has now theoretically the right to stay in power until 2036, which would mean another 16 years, we think he should try to really quickly present somebody who could be the successor in order to at least preserve this political stability, because otherwise he will also get more problems from the street again. And is what regards investment, and this is associated with this also bottom-up model of governance, is that This should be underpinned with more money coming in, going into the educational system, the health system, digital infrastructure. The overall innovation system is still heavily centralized and concentrated in Moscow. There needs to be much more research and development in the regions. We need more education, more higher level education together with technology transfer in the regions. And especially we need more dynamic in the small and medium-sized companies. Due to the let's say, legacy of planning economy, small and medium-sized companies have not been there practically. In the last year, some came up, but it's still not the same as in Western Europe or even in Italy. You know, Italy is a very diversified country in this regard, or like Germany. You cannot see this kind of structure there in Russia. Russia is still dominated by rather big companies associated with the resource economy. And another, and maybe this is the last point regarding investment, is that now, due to climate change, there come up quite new problems, especially with the regions where permafrost is now under pressure. We had in November more than 13 to 15 degrees over the 30 years average degree centigrade in Siberia. So the permafrost regions are under pressure, and this will mean a lot of damage to the infrastructure in the north of Russia, which will be a high cost for the companies, for the government. But this would also mean that we will see more ecologically, let's say, haveries and problems because of the infrastructure collapsing, and oil and gas and other things will flow out. So from this point of view, we say we need more bottom-up development, and for this, Russia is not a country as maybe we know from Western Europe, which are all diverse countries, but we have here a country with over 185 different ethnic groups, with 85 single regional districts. So there's a lot of, let's say, diversity in Russia. And we think that if you give more power to the regions and more incentives to develop country from the regions out, from the regions off, you can also try to orientate a bit on what the European Union is propagating here in Western Europe with some associated smart specialization. That means that you try to identify specific local endogenous endowments that you use to further concentrate your investment on your regional portfolio. So even there, it's possible to look at regions in Russia from this point of view, like we do it in Western Europe, because Western Europe, especially the European Union, is also quite diverse regarding the economic power and level of income in several regions. And for Eastern Europe, and especially for the European Union, regarding regional development can also be applied in Russia in a specific way. So this regional perspective gives hope that there's a lot of potential that Russia can use for developing its own economy from bottom up. So this is the thing we think is now critical to change this regime. Otherwise, Russia will fall behind absolutely and relatively. The young generation is especially, or needs to be motivated to stay in the country, to develop the family there, to develop their professional life here, to create to found a company. And for this also, vis-a-vis other countries outside, there needs to be more political opening inside, but also outside regarding cooperation with Western European countries, with China in the future. Now we have to come back to a normal relationship. And maybe what is good news for Mr. Putin and Russia is that with the new US presidency, there will be not so much pressure on the current Nord Stream 2. Today was the news that Nord Stream 2 is going further ahead with the construction. It was stalled because of sanctions from the United States. It's now going on further, and we think that this is also a chance, the new presidency, for Russia to a bit more open itself and to create another perspective regarding cooperation, especially also in import-export area. So we say the country is at a critical point, but there are chances and taken or need to be put by government right now. So this is our opinion regarding the perspectives of Russia, and we thank you for your attention and are now able to answer your question.